I am fascinated by the subject of aliens. And I figured, after going on this amazing hike in New Mexico through the desert, this would be no better backdrop than to go through some of the great lore of alien stories that have taken place in this exact part of the country. Where we are is a little outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and there are countless stories that have taken place within these mountains, these surrounding areas, and all over this amazing state. So this is Watch Our Steps, and we do all sorts of explorations around the United States, and if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. So I think the first one that I'll talk about is a story that we actually heard from another hiker when we were very near here in Bandelier National Monument. We had just climbed up the huge set of ladders and got to talking to an older gentleman who said that right on the freeway, literally a stone's throw from the trailhead on this trail, his friend was driving one night between Albuquerque and Santa Fe, which is a pretty well-driven path. You know, sometimes in New Mexico you're on a road and there's nobody for 2 hours, but not on that road. And anyway, his friend saw the famous, or one of, the famous Tic Tac UFOs flying literally right over this area, and said that immediately after seeing it, 2 Black Hawk helicopters flew right by. And as someone that has been here often, that tracks in the sense that there is Kirtland Air Force Base right around here, and you see helicopters flying all the time. But it's amazing that this story, when he was a very credible seeming guy, and it's amazing that nobody else has ever talked about such a sighting. And that's not the first time. If you're someone that's familiar with the subject of UFOs, it's not the first time that someone has seen a UFO on a highway surrounded by other people and either tried to take a picture of it to no success or try to point it out to other people that just don't see it. And as we're walking up along here, we're going to get some really good expansive views of this mountain. This is the Sandia Mountain, and Albuquerque lies in its shadows, but this is by no means a normal day hike. People can come here and take a jog, but other people can literally get lost in this wilderness because it is vast and expansive, and I don't know, I think it's the perfect candidate for the aliens. I have no doubt that a lot of the stories that come from this part of the country have some grain of truth in them, just because you hike around here, whether that's in the desert like this, in the mountains, or in the forests around Cibola, you can definitely sense different energies in different places. And as we hike through here, you're going to see a lot of really interesting cactus and great fauna. One of the parts of New Mexico that has the most sightings, you know, a lot of people think Roswell, which is to the south of here. It's actually just slightly to the north. From the spot that we're standing right now, if you look over that crest, you have some more wilderness in the back of the mountain. And then you have some kind of deserted ghost towns. There's a ghost town called Golden, and then you can basically take the Turquoise Trail Road, which is well paved, unlike a lot of places in New Mexico, and you can basically take that all the way to other ghost towns like Madrid and up into Chama and Taos. And there's stories dating back to the early 1900s of couples that have been driving on those roads late at night, and seemingly nobody's around, and then they see a light over them. And this is long before even normal commercial travel, especially in this part, air travel. And they see this light and realize that there's a giant airship above them, and it follows them before randomly taking off in the middle of nowhere. And these people have relayed their accounts much to their own detriment, because once they talk about their stories, they tend not to be believed. New Mexico is full of tales like that. Another one that comes to mind that I can think of is directly to the south of Albuquerque, there is a medium town called Socorro, and we're actually planning on releasing a video noting the spot of this story that I'm about to tell, as well as a really great hike that happened in the foothills that has some interesting lore to it as well. But there was a police officer named Lonnie Zamora, and I can pull up the exact date, but he had a famous UFO sighting that took place in Socorro while he was on duty. And if you go to that town, there are a couple little remnants of it, but really it's not like Roswell, New Mexico, where the whole town is basically a tourist trap for that place. But he was basically chasing somebody down the road, and basically thought he saw a flame in the sky, and it was about a half mile away from where he was, and he thought that maybe a dynamite shack had exploded or something like that, rural New Mexico in the 60s or whatever. So he drove to it, and instead of seeing a shack on fire, he saw something completely different. Turned out to be what can only be described as sort of a tic-tac or oval-shaped white UFO, which he originally mistook for an overturned car. He was basically stopped in his tracks, had never seen anything like it, and said that there were actually two people in white overalls, or what he thought were people, in white overalls standing beside the craft. They were not full adult size, and basically he observed it, and it flew up in the sky, and he never saw it again. He then went on to tell people about that, and basically was discredited in the town of Socorro, to where people were getting speeding tickets from him and saying, hey, that's the guy that saw the UFO, is he really trustworthy? And it sort of ruined his career. We ended up talking to an old-timer in a shop there about it, and the guy put up a mural, actually, commemorating the incident in Lonnie Zamora. But it's a good example in New Mexico, and that was after already dozens and dozens of other UFO sightings. This is after Roswell, and still people didn't believe this incident had taken place. I think it's a pretty credible one. There are definitely accounts that you hear and well, it could have happened, it could have been mistaken for, any sort of missile testing or aircraft testing in the area by the military, but this is not an example of that. As we look over, you're going to see a little shot of Albuquerque there, but we're pretty far away at this point. There's no city noise as we're up on this trail, and very, very few people. I think this might be a good chance to talk about Roswell, which definitely dominates the conversation of UFOs in New Mexico. And that is a story that has a lot of misconceptions about it. People tend to think that basically what happened was, and first of all, the terrain in that area is pretty dissimilar to this. It's a lot flatter. We're talking ranch land. New Mexico is a vast and large state, but it's interesting because there are UFO sightings from the top to the bottom, and everywhere in between there's been UFO sightings. But with Roswell specifically, a lot of people think that some country bumpkin rancher saw a weather balloon that went down, or mistook a weather balloon in this small finite area, and it was just some tinfoil and balsa wood, and that's about it. But in fact, based on all the reporting that I've read on the incident, there was a debris field that stretched for nearly a mile, and this was a metal unlike anything anybody had ever seen before. And he collected some of that metal and took it to not only his family, but also the local bar in town, and passed it around for everybody to look at. And the one story that persists after all those years is that as people took that metal, they were able to crumple it. It was light as a feather, and as soon as they let it go, it would retain its original shape. And of course the military became involved in that, and there's a whole story related to that a lot of people don't know, and maybe, I feel like talking about a few different stories for this one, but I can absolutely do a Roswell video if that's of interest and go down there and document it and pretty much tell it exactly how it was. But the government did get involved there, and to this day they maintain that it was a secret project for a weather balloon, and that the little beings that were recovered were actually just crash test dummies, even though by their own admission they weren't using crash test dummies on those projects until the 1950s. The Roswell incident happened in the 40s. So it's a good example of a very credible and interesting case, and you gotta think, if that happened in the 21st century with modern day cameras, the whole UFO debate would be answered pretty quickly one way or another. This is, as we go along this hike, this is definitely something where we were, filming one hand and using trekking poles on the other. I would recommend, if anybody's doing this outside of New Mexico, or someone from outside of New Mexico comes here to do this, bring water and equipment, and you never know what you're going to need on the trail. I think one of the other interesting stories that I've heard about this region in particular was that in the 1950s, there was a scientist who to this day has never been named publicly because he did not want to be associated with the story that I'm about to tell you. And he was just a few miles from this exact location, driving on a suburban street in Albuquerque, when he saw what was basically he described as a flying saucer above him, and nobody else seemed to see it. Another one of those cases. And it flew away. And you got to think, is there some connection between the mountains and the UFOs? Because if you go down the rabbit hole on UFOs, you tend to realize that there's, very, very much a correlation between mountains and terrain like we're in right now, or even more extreme terrain with colder weather, and UFO sightings. And it's one of the more strange rabbit holes you can go down. Of course, that goes into the realm of secret bases and underground layers and things like that. And for some people, that can be a turn-off for the entire subject, but for other people, they are, pretty much certain in their minds that there's secret bases, whether that's Mount Shasta in California or places in Alaska or Antarctica. But New Mexico is certainly in my opinion, the original hotbed for modern day UFO crashes and sightings. Some of the more interesting ones that have taken place over a series of time, you often think that a UFO is just a one and done sighting. But in New Mexico, that's not the case. Dozens to maybe even hundreds of people in the 40s and 50s were seeing these waves of blue lights. And as we look over the range here, you can imagine it's both day or night, and you're a military scientist or researcher, pilot, or even a civilian in Albuquerque, White Sands, Santa Fe, wherever, and you see these blue lights flying in formation. Of course, this is the 1940s. There's really nothing like this. And you think, hey, I work for the military. Maybe I would know what's going on here. But all these people with high clearances and, really good insight did not know what these blue lights were that were flying in formation above the skies of New Mexico. And there's reports of these blue lights ranging in speeds of, normal aircraft to astronomically high speeds that nothing in the 40s or 50s could reach, and I doubt anything now could reach. These are things that could go through the whole sky in the blink of an eye. So that's one of the more interesting stories of UFOs in this area. If we release another video related to this, we're going to probably take a hike through a more forested region of New Mexico that is home to both UFO stories as well as some local legends. It's literally, if it wasn't for this peak right here, you could actually see the area that I'm talking about near Harris, New Mexico, which has been an area strife with all sorts of accounts of, bad relations between settlers and Native Americans and people trying to stake claims on the land and ghost stories, things like that. And you got to think that, this is a area that would be of interest maybe to UFOs if we're going to just entertain the idea that there is something that would be interested in humans. Where would they look? Well, would they look at New York City? Well, maybe, but they could also look at Paris. Why New Mexico? There's a few reasons. One, because it is a state, an area that has many dozens of different ecosystems in one small area. You have Carlsbad Caverns, you have white sands, deserts, forests, you name it. It's also an area where the United States government, the most powerful government in the 40s, was doing the most extensive, cutting-edge military testing in the entire world. And to this day, much of the state, if it's not ranch, land, or city, is owned by the U.S. government doing all sorts of secretive testing. And it's really a hotbed for all the research that goes on here. You can take a drive and you end up accidentally going through an area where you're going to have to show your ID and tell them why you're passing through because it's, some sort of nuclear testing or research going on in somewhere like, slightly north of Albuquerque, where all that stuff is going on. And so you'd think that could be of interest, as well as just the cultures that have existed here for so long. You have footprints in white sands dating back tens of thousands of years of humans walking next to woolly mammoths, people that were making petroglyphs. These are ancestors to the Navajos, making these petroglyphs that, even when the Spanish conquistadors came through here, they had no idea what they were. So they put their own petroglyphs in, but these original ones are showing, sometimes mundane things that everybody knows, like cattle and things of that nature, animals, and other times showing things that really completely look crazy, like bird people and ships and all sorts of stuff. And you think, well, maybe these are gods, or maybe these are things that were interacting with whatever these civilizations were long before, normal written history was involved. And then you have just all the amazing conflicts and history that has taken place in the United States West. This is an area that, for the most part has been completely desolate other than few roaming tribes for a long time. And then just like that, you had all sorts of people coming through claiming this land. It was a spot where war took place. It was a spot where legends were born. And the alien story fits really nicely within that. And as you're going through these hikes in New Mexico, we'll take a second to just kind of think about how interesting of a place this really is. I think that if you take a second, sit down, look at your surroundings, you might just feel the energy of this place, regardless of UFOs or things like that. Before we ended up taking this trip, I bought a book that my girlfriend and I read, and I think that a lot of the information, although anecdotal, was really interesting, and I referenced a few of the cases that were written in it, and it's UFOs over New Mexico, and it's a book written by a researcher named Preston Dennett, and he recounts many of the really more interesting UFO stories that have taken place in this state. And I've maybe mentioned 3 or 4, but he has dozens, if not 100 or so cases written in there. And I think this is a good time to talk about one of my favorite UFO sightings that has ever taken place, and that was the airship wave that took place in the 1800s. And a lot of people, when they hear about that, they think, if they know anything, they think about maybe the sighting that happened in Oakland, where a whole group of people, a boy, a man, they all saw this airship flying. But there was actually, the first sighting was in New Mexico of this airship in the 1800s, before the Wright brothers ever flew, of this, almost steampunk-like vessel that was in the sky with wings and lights and all this stuff going on. And what happened was the people in the area right around here saw this and were looking amazed at what they were seeing. And there were, according to the people on the ground, there were other people in this ship, and they were speaking in an unknown language, and they ended up throwing items out, including I believe like a saucer or a teacup, and it was made out of some sort of material that they didn't know, and it was put on display in New Mexico in the 1800s, and then it was bought by this older gentleman who collected curiosities, and it was never to be seen again. And it was the first of the airships that were seen in this part of the country. And for anybody that's interested in the subject, they might know the idea that UFOs present themselves differently to people in times. So you had the 1940s and 50s, the so-called, beginning of the space age. And the UFOs presented themselves at that time as flying saucers, exactly aligned with what people were imagining flying in the skies. And in the 1800s, they were these airships. And if you go even further back in time, not just to New Mexico, but to Europe, you have all these stories about wheels or chariots in the sky. And, people might say that that's just allegory for religious things, and other historians point out, hey, maybe this was, just a thread in the greater phenomenon of UFOs. But it's no denying that people were seeing something in New Mexico, and people still are. You can go here, and we talked to just a couple people, and within the first couple interactions, UFOs came up, and someone through a second hand had a sighting and had a story related to it. That can be really interesting to learn about. And you can only hope that these people are putting these stories down so that in 10 years, 20 years, they're in a book too, because every sighting is important, even if they're not completely the most credible sighting. They are important. And with that, I think if you've enjoyed this video thus far, if you wouldn't mind leaving a like or subscribing, and definitely if you have any New Mexico stories of your own, be sure to leave them in the comments below. I'd be greatly interested in learning about any UFO sightings that you've had. And if you enjoyed this type of video, we love going out and filming locations. Everything that you see on this channel is something that we've filmed ourselves, and we take the time to go and edit and do these hikes, and it's really fun, and it can be fun to just kind of shoot the breeze and talk about something a little different, like aliens or something like that. So be sure to comment where you want us to go next if you have any ideas like that. And as usual, I've got more video than I do things to talk about right now, so I think I'll just kind of let it go, and we can enjoy the final ascent to a really good view. And there's no UFOs to be seen in this one, but hey, maybe there are. Oh, and also we have some really cool shorts about ghost towns in New Mexico. It can be, we make like 15-second videos on that, but honestly, we spend whole nights driving around ghost towns in New Mexico and really strange and scary locations in a car that's definitely not suited to be off-roading in New Mexico at 2 in the morning, but we do it anyway. So if you enjoy that, go check it out, and make sure to see you in the next one. Thanks.